Howdy, welcome to the House District 26 For the Future Runoff Candidates Forum on Public Education. Thank you all for joining us today. The Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce and Raise Your Hand Texas are hosting this forum to create an unbiased platform for our candidates to share their message with the community. My name is Jason Burdine. I'm the president of the Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustees, and I'll be your moderator for this platform for public education. Today's event is brought to you by the partnership between the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce and Raise Your Hand Texas. Thank you both. The 5-star accredited Fort Bend Chamber is the largest single county chamber in the Houston region. Over 1,000 members enjoy measurable benefits along with access to influence in the dynamic Fort Bend business climate. As an advocate for excellence in Fort Bend County and beyond, our chamber is a catalyst for economic prosperity, tourism, and community involvement. Raise Your Hand Texas is a nonprofit organization that creates programs, invests in research, develops policy, and supports advocacy to solve the complex issues surrounding public education on various fronts. At the conclusion of this event, you will hear more about Raise Your Hand Texas from Dr. Robert Long III, who is the Regional Advocacy Director for Raise Your Hand Texas and the organizer for the discussion regarding public education. Dr. Long supports 16 districts in the West Houston area and works with the community, local leaders, and school officials to build a pro-public education atmosphere in the West Houston region. We thank you, Dr. Long, for your advocacy and willingness to partner in our community. I want to take the time to provide you with a little overview of Fort Bend ISD. Fort Bend County, as you know, is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. As the largest school district in the county, Fort Bend ISD is an outstanding K-12 public education system. The Fort Bend ISD School District is Texas' 8th largest district with approximately 76,000 students and one of the most diverse in the nation. Working and learning cohesively alongside families who speak more than 90 languages and dialects. The schools work together with students, their families, and the community to address each student's unique needs. The district covers over 169 square miles. Fort Bend ISD currently has 80 campuses, 11 high schools, 15 middle schools, and 51 elementary campuses, and 3 unique secondary campuses to address the academic and vocational interest of students. With more than 10,000 full-time employees and substitutes, the district is the largest employer in Fort Bend County. Fort Bend ISD, its campuses, and its students are routinely recognized for exemplary achievements by organizations such as the National Merit Scholars Program, the National Association of Music Merchants, Children at Risk, the Washington Post Top High Schools in the Nation rankings, U.S. News and World Report's Best High Schools in the Nation, and the United States Presidential Scholars Program. The Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustees has been recognized as both the HEB and Excellence Education Award winner for 2017 Outstanding School Board, and then again in 2018 as Outstanding Large District winner. Winning these state-level awards brought both notoriety and validation that Fort Bend ISD is an innovator and leader in the great state of Texas. Our goal for the Future Candidate Forum is to create a civil environment of mutual respect in which candidates have the opportunity to communicate clearly and viewers have the opportunity to learn more about both issues and candidates. With that in mind, our rules for this virtual event for the candidates are as follows. Number 1, respond directly to the content matter in the question posed. Number 2, direct your answers only to the moderator and viewers. Do not engage your fellow candidates. Refrain from referencing other candidates' past statements or voting records. We want you to use this time to allow for those to learn more about you in our community, not take on your opponents. Do not interrupt your fellow candidates when they are responding to a question. Keep the stated time limits for your responses. You will have 2 minutes to answer each question. As the moderator, I will signal when you have 30 seconds left by holding up a yellow card and 10 seconds left by holding up a red card. Should any participant lose the internet connection, we will take a 5-minute break while we will work to reestablish the connection. If at the end of the 5 minutes we still are not able to have all candidates present, we will give each of the remaining candidates an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement before concluding the event. If I feel that a candidate is not respecting these rules, I will mute you and direct the conversation to the subject matter at hand. Before I formally introduce our candidates, I would like to acknowledge that we reached out to every candidate in this runoff election and asked all of them to participate. We are grateful for the 3 candidates present here today. At this time, I would like to welcome our candidates for today's discussion. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. First, we have Mr. Jacey Jetton. Mr. Jetton. Dr. Suleman Lalani. And
Hello.
Mr. Matt Morgan. Thank you all. The format for today's forum. As a reminder, this will be a timed response forum. You will each have 1 minute to present an opening statement. You will each have 2 minutes to answer each question. Candidates will receive a reminder at 30 seconds in the form of me displaying a yellow card and 10 seconds by me displaying the red card. You will each have 1 minute each to present a closing statement. Should time permit, we will have 2 to 3 audience questions which were submitted upon registering for this event. Gentlemen, you will now be provided with 1 minute to present the audience with an opening statement around your campaign and support for public education. We will begin with Mr. Jacey Jetton. Go ahead, Mr. Jetton, you have 1 minute.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's good to virtually be with everyone. My name is Jacey Jetton. I'm running for state representative for House District 26. Small business owner, served in the Army National Guard. 2 children, 8 years old and 12-year-old, both attending Fort Bend ISD schools, and have a lot of concerns and a lot of desires to see our next, our future generations benefit from us addressing COVID now in this next legislative session. So eager to have this discussion with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Dr. Suleman Lalani, you're next, sir.
Hello, I'm Dr. Suleman Lalani, running to be your next state representative for District 26. I'm running because education is important to me. I have 3 boys, 2 of them are in college, 1 in school, and I'm afraid public education is failing us. Texas ranks, when it compares to other states, ranks 43rd on per student spending. We need to increase, but more importantly, find a sustainable mechanism for our public education. We need to increase teachers' pay so we can attract and retain quality teachers. We need to focus back in teaching our students critical thinking skills and comprehension rather than teaching them test-taking skills. We are creating a lot of paper degrees, but not the creative minds for the leaders of tomorrow. I believe that well-educated Texas is a strong Texas for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani. Last but not least, Mr. Matt Morgan. Go ahead, sir. You have 1 minute.
Howdy, y'all. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, or morning, I guess it still is. So appreciate you guys being on. My name is Matt Morgan. I'm running for House District 26. I want to make Texas better, safer, stronger for our kids, our family, and our future, and that's what our mission's been all about from day one. We've blocked, walked, and knocked 20,000 doors to try and get to know the people and the voters and make sure that we are their voice in Austin, and that's what it's all about. We're a true grassroots campaign, not funded by lobbyists or anybody else. So I grew up in this area. I actually am a graduate of Kempner High School, which is in Fort Bend ISD. My mom's a retired teacher from Fort Bend ISD. Just recently, she was at Elkins High School. And my sister is currently a teacher at Sugarland Middle School. So I understand public education. I understand what it takes to retain and keep good teachers and what we need to do to try and fix this system. And that's why I'm here. And I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. All right, here we are for question number 1, and it is related to COVID-19. I'm going to give you a little narrative, a little context around this question, so please listen carefully. The emergency response school districts provided in response to COVID-19 show just how important public schools are to each community. Health and safety was the priority. Food and nutrition needs were met. And while technology and connectivity issues were exposed, teachers did their best to provide instructional continuity to their students. So the question is, what are your school district's biggest concerns for the next school year, and how can the state help address these and other challenges? We're going to start off with Mr. Matt Morgan. You'll have 2 minutes, sir.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. I think, some of the biggest issues that, we're going to face going into this next school year is obviously, the cost that the school districts had for maintaining social distancing going forward, and also for, sanitization and personal protective equipment. So, I think those costs are burdens that are put on, the local school districts currently, and those costs, will be pushed on to, the homeowners and business owners. And so those are things that I think the state needs to look at addressing to ensure that we have safe environments for our children and our student and teachers to go back into, and making sure that those costs aren't, carried by the local taxpayers in those areas. So those are things I would look to focus for, and make sure that the state does their part to step up and help out.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Next, Dr. Suleman Lalani, would you like for me to read the question, sir?
Please.
What are your school district's biggest concerns for the next school year, and how can the state help address these and other challenges? You'll have 2 minutes.
I think the schools, as with other institutions that I see, like prisons or jails or the senior livings, the nursing homes, they carry the same risk factor. The kids will be exposed to the virus, and then they will bring that back to the faculty or maybe parents or families, and people who are elderly or more frail will be affected more. So we need to be careful in that regard about prevention and taking those measures. For the state side, I think we need to focus more on virtual schooling for now. Also, we need to eliminate the standardized testing, and possible reopening if that is safe, if we find in medical literature how that has been going to happen, and to find the creative ways of funding. So again, I would not want to burden, which our taxpayers are already burdened with higher property taxes and other things. So we need to find those creative mechanisms in.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani. Mr. Jacey Jetton, would you like for me to reread the question, sir?
No, I'm good. I just want to start off my response with commending Fort Bend ISD and Lamar Consolidated ISD board members for their response, quick response to the situation. It wasn't an easy one. There's a lot of unique challenges that we had to deal with, and I believe that they quickly found solutions and adapted us to a new learning environment very quickly. I think we've learned a lot from that, and I think that we're going to be able to deploy some of that in this upcoming school year. And so in regards to the concerns, I think parents, teachers, administrators are all worried about the health concerns. I think that there are things that we're going to have to do to ensure and make everyone feel comfortable that we're providing a safe and healthy environment for our children to go back to school in. And as far as, the state side, I think everyone at this point is getting concerned about the response that, the economy, the factors of the economy and how they're going to impact our tax revenue and how we're going to pay for future school years. And so I think that I believe it's $1.3 billion that was granted to or given to us from the federal level from the CARES Act. And I'm in favor of the governor holding on to those funds to ensure that we're able to fulfill any budget shortfall we may find in the future. And so I think funding and health concerns are probably the two main things that we have to deal with this next school year.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. All right, gentlemen, we're moving on to question number 2. It is related to digital divide. Fort Bend ISD reported they lost contact with only 3% of kids when they closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. While our neighboring district, Lamar Consolidated ISD, reported that they lost contact with just under 13% of their students when they were forced to close due to COVID-19. What do you see as the state's role in ensuring that students have the tools necessary to participate in online instruction, including internet access and devices? First is Dr. Lalani.
Thank you. I think if we must go to virtual learning, we make sure that the resources are available to the children, the laptops and the internet connections, because we have seen a lot of neighborhoods which we don't have all those resources. So we need to make sure that we do that so everybody's equipped all right. In addition to that, I would also look into that we should look into parental capacities, because a lot of families are single parent, and who's going to teach them on the schools that the teachers are not present physically there. Also, we need to look into the mental health capacity too. Have some mental health resources, because a lot of stress, anxiety is also going on. Also look into nutrition part of it, because there were some places where the students were the only one getting the first meal only in the school. So there are various factors that get involved. So we need to look into bigger picture. And certainly we need to look at every aspect of that. So education, providing them the resources that will require laptops and all that, but also environment which is safe for them and for them to learn.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani. Next is Mr. Matt Morgan. Would you like for me to reread the question, sir?
No, thank you. So, first on this, I want to say our school districts did some of the best in the state in not losing contact, and that was due to the school board and administration making sure that, like Fort Bend ISD only losing contact with approximately 3%. That was for the school board buying the laptops and ensuring the students had the Wi-Fi connectivity that they needed in order to make sure that they could continue learning in a difficult environment remotely from home. So, I want to commend them on that. And the same with the Lamar Consolidated. I understand Lamar recently got a grant to make sure that, going forward, should they need to, they'll be able to buy laptops and, provide Wi-Fi connectivity to students should they have to start digitally in the future. And so I think those are, very important things and tasks that have been done. I think, everyone, including the teachers, the school board members, and everyone had many lessons learned regarding, the last few months of this last semester. And, I'm sure that, there are plans being put in place, by those school board members, administrators, to ensure that, kids can get a proper education should we have to do things digitally. So, I'm confident in our local elected officials in the decisions that they've made to try and ensure that everyone gets what they need to have a quality education going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Jetton, would you like for me to reread the question, sir?
No. And I'll echo that. Fort Bend ISD and LCISD did an amazing job with making sure that we close that digital divide and ensure that we had that our children had the devices they need to be able to fill their school year. I think that going into this next school year, it would, from the state side, I would love to see a grant started and possibly maintained by the TEA to ensure that there's funds available in the future to help at risk and those easier or more at risk of us losing contact with having access to internet connectivity and devices going forward. So I think that's probably the best option that we can provide from the state level, and continue to provide the tools and resources local school districts need to address these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Appreciate your answer. We're going to move on to question number 3, and it's related to school funding. Fortunately, Texas public schools did not see a decline in student funding during the 2019-20 school year. However, Texas did receive an additional $1.3 billion in federal stimulus known as the CARES Act. The state used this federal funding to replace state funding to schools, in effect, not providing any additional dollars for education and allowing the state to save $1.3 billion for the future use, knowing that a historic economic downturn is looming. So with this in mind, The question is, do you support the state's decision to supplant that funding, and would you commit to using that funding to avoid public education cuts in the next session? First is Mr. Jacey Jetton.
Sure, absolutely. I think that is a responsible response to the for the money that we've gotten so far to ensure that we are able to cover any budget shortfalls. The last thing we want is for this to fall onto the taxpayers, the property taxpayers' backs alone. And so saving that money to be used on education makes the most sense. I think that if we get any more funding from the federal level, that those can be considered to be used for additional expenditures that the school districts are facing when it comes to keeping the schools safe and healthy, providing PPE and those type of things. But as far as making sure that we have the funds available for future school years, that 1.3 billion, it could be crucial. And so,
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Next is Dr. Lalani. You'll have 2 minutes, sir. Would you like for me to reread the question?
Yes, please.
Do you support the state's decision to supplant that funding, the $1.3 billion, and would you commit to using that funding to avoid public education cuts in the next session?
I think a state should continue to commit to their funds and support the commitment that they have made. The CARES Act should be added, but should not be supplanted. We should not have a budget cut. We have done back in the past, and we don't want to get into the game of catching the tail. And we have seen historically we have failed. We are already behind in our budget. So CARES Act should be added, and it should be used for immediate need for the pandemics and education.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani. And last but not least, Mr. Matt Morgan, would you like for me to restate the question, sir?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So, sure. So first, it's going to be important that we're very innovative in our solutions and finding problems for, budget issues that we're going to face in this next legislative session. We are fortunate that to have received that $1.3 billion that's been, set aside and earmarked for education. And, my intent as a legislator would be to make sure that that's there to help with, those additional things we talked about, including, the PPE, the sanitation, the social distancing requirements and guidelines that have come down from, TEA and others. And, would also be there to help with grants and funding to make sure that we, close the gap on that digital divide, should we have to go back to a virtual learning environment to, pay for Wi-Fi and laptops and, meal plans and stuff like that. So, I'm glad that we have that sitting back there, and I want to make sure that that's used properly to ensure that each student in Texas gets a proper education moving forward. It's so important that we raise our kids and give them a good education because they're our future, and we need to make sure that they're bright and our future is bright.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate your answer. Moving along to question number 4, and it's related to accountability. So there's been considerable pushback to the state's high-stakes STAR exam for various reasons over the past few years. Due to COVID-19, both the state and the federal government waived student testing requirements for the 2019-20 school year. While there is no doubt student diagnostic assessments will be needed to provide effective instruction, should the state require districts to administer the STAR and end-of-year course exams next year? Should school districts and campuses be rated in the state's A through F accountability system next year? Dr. Lalani, you're first, sir.
Well, if our children have to face the A to F accountability, I think our state leaders should also face it, and a lot of our leaders are getting F right now. I think I will oppose the STAR testing. This is a good way to test for the accumulation of learning, but with this, especially time that was lapsed, also maybe like in one semester which was lost. I think this is a good time to reevaluate our testing system and come with some other creative mechanism. I would say we should not do STAR testing this year.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani. Next is Mr. Matt Morgan.
Sure. And so, want to let everyone know that the STAR test costs us roughly $90 million a year. And so, we're going to have budget issues going forward. And while we do need accountability and to make sure that, we're teaching the right materials and that students are actually learning the information and everything else, if we're still in a pandemic type environment and we're doing virtual learning again, I'm not certain that, spending $90 million to test everyone this way is the right avenue to take. So I think it depends on, how we continue to move forward through this, what's going on. We do need to have accountability from, the student, the parent, the teacher, and, the district, if you will. But, it's important to make sure that we do things the right way and that we don't just teach to test, we teach students to learn the materials, that they're being taught. And so I want to make sure that that's done properly and effectively as we can in a virtual environment, should we have to go back to that.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Jetton, you're next. Would you like for me to restate the question, sir?
No, that's okay.
All right.
I actually have the complete opposite idea on this. I think that it's more important than ever to make sure that we are continuing to do benchmark testing to make sure that our children are getting the education that they need. And one of the biggest concerns that I have right now is with an 8-year-old and 12-year-old, the benchmark testing ensures that you're meeting the goals that you have for the classroom. Going into this next school year, it's going to be important to ensure that our children are getting the expected education and knowing where we're at so that we can catch them up and ensure that they're on track. And so I'm in favor of continuing the STAR test, really, because that is the test that we have done for years, and that is something that we can match scores and results on to ensure that we are meeting those expectations and can continue to educate our children based on that.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Appreciate your answer, sir. Moving along to question number 5, which is related to vouchers. A voucher refers to public tax dollars diverted from public schools to subsidize private school tuition or other products and services from private vendors. School vouchers come in many forms, including virtual or online providers. In all cases, students receive taxpayer dollars to attend private schools with no state academic or financial accessibility. Some may say that this equates to a form of taxation without representation. So the question is, what's your position on vouchers, including virtual vouchers? Mr. Matt Morgan, you're first, sir.
Sure. So my answer is going to be kind of short and sweet on this one. So I do support vouchers, or the idea of vouchers, although I will say that I have not yet seen a voucher bill or system that I could positively cast a vote for at this time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Jetton.
Sure. I'll keep this one short and simple as well. I'm in favor of a school voucher system. I think it needs to meet 2 criteria. I think it needs to adequately protect taxpayer dollars, and I think that it needs to ensure that we're meeting the constitutional obligation that we have from the state level to provide suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public education. And so I think everyone in the entire state should have access to a good education option. And so, yes, I'm in favor of a school voucher system.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. We are moving on to question number 7, I believe. Let's see here. Question number 7, which is related to the Texas Teacher Pipeline Preparation and Training. So experienced and new teachers alike are learning new methods of providing effective instruction. Most educator preparation programs and professional development have been geared towards providing effective classroom instruction in person. Due to COVID-19, the way instruction is provided has been shifted to what is now referred to as 1, synchronous online learning, meaning same-time online instruction through online platforms, and or asynchronous online learning, meaning student-paced learning through online platforms or instructional materials. These forms of instruction need a different type of skill set for our teachers and a different set of materials for our students. So that leads up to the next question. As a servant leader, I think we can all agree that very few educators were prepared to teach in such an unusual environment. How should the state support teacher training in online instruction, trauma-informed social-emotional teaching, and internet connectivity in the upcoming school year? We will start with Mr. Morgan. Mr. Morgan, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Sure. So first, I'd like to start and say that, our local districts did a fantastic job in responding to this, which I've mentioned a couple times before. Fort Bend ISD only lost contact with 3%, provided Wi-Fi for every student that needed it, and also a laptop. So, and Lamar Consolidated did a fantastic job as well, doing everything that they could with the resources they had available to them. So, those are things that I think our school districts did a fantastic job on. I think other school districts can learn from them and help them with that. I believe that, understanding and online education is a difficult thing, and making sure that we have plans in place. I'm sure the school boards will be doing this, going forward, so that teachers are prepared for that and have that information available to them to make sure that they are learning that. And I think it's going to push into our colleges as well, who are teaching our teachers how to teach. And I think those best practices and lessons learned should start being applied into our higher education system as well. And that will help us, make sure that as this continues forward, any pandemic or disaster that comes to us, we will be well prepared for and ready to meet those challenges head on. So.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate your answer. Mr. Jetton.
Yeah, so I think our teachers had a big crash course in teaching in this new educational environment. I think there's a lot of lessons learned from it, and I think that I believe that most of our school districts, our principals and assistant principals, are going to be able to look at that and take away the positive and negatives that'll help us prepare training for the next school year. I think there's a great opportunity for colleges, universities, alternate certificate programs to take those lessons learned and ensure that our teachers are well equipped to teach under these different learning environments going forward. On the internet connectivity issue, I think, as I stated before, I think there's an opportunity for us to set up a grant type program under the TEA that we can use to address internet connectivity issues for those at risk and hard to reach children.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Moving on to question number 8, which is related to school funding. In the next legislative session, the state may be facing a similar or even bigger budget challenge to 2011, when public education was cut by $5.4 billion. Would you support increasing state revenue sources to avoid cutting public education? Mr. Jacey Jetton, you're first, sir.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any doubt that we're about to face one of the toughest legislative cycles that we've had to deal with in a long time. We're going to have budget shortfalls, and our state legislators are going to make very tough decisions that aren't going to make everyone happy. When it comes to increasing state revenue, I'm not in favor of raising taxes for what is now a temporary problem. I think that this lull in the economy is not the reason that we should go and raise taxes. I think that we're going to have to look at wisely use the CARES Act money that we get from the federal government and make those tough decisions when it comes to our budget. Just like we do at home, we look at the revenue that's coming in and we budget according to that. We're going to make tough decisions. It's going to be important for us to communicate with our local school board members and with the voters to ensure that they understand the decisions we're making and have an opportunity to weigh into those decisions. So,
thank you, Mr. Jetton. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, so first I'm going to say I'm not for raising taxes, never am. My sister got taxed out of House District 26 already from property tax issues. And so I want to make sure that everyone and every voter has as much money available to them as possible. And I want to ensure we do not raise taxes. So, but regarding, the budget cuts and stuff like that, yes, it's going to be an extremely difficult session. We need somebody that's a fighter, somebody that's a small business owner like myself that understands what it means to, run a business, meet a payroll, and, go through these difficult times and situations. And so, I want to make sure that the schools have the funding they need in order to function and teach our children, because that's very important. But we've got to come up with innovative solutions in order to resolve those things. So that's what I'm all about, is wanting to find new solutions. Using that $1.3 billion gives us a bit of a cushion to ensure that, schools get what they need. But, it may take more, and we'll just have to figure out solutions to get that done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan. We are now going to move along to our audience participation questions for today. I've got 3 questions here from registered attendees, and we do have the time, so we're going to go ahead and address each of them in an equal manner. I'm going to choose Mr. Matt Morgan for the first question. You're going to go first, sir. You will have 2 minutes to answer this question. What additional revenue streams do you believe would be possible next session to help fund increasing education funding?
So that's a good question. I think that, possibly there will be more money that comes from the federal government. I think that, also budget cuts from other, entities, government entities, if you will. So the governor already asked, various government entities to cut their budgets and stuff like that. So I think that's what we're going to have to look at in order to meet the needs of the local schools.
All right. Mr. Jetton, I'm going to read the question again for you here. What additional revenue streams do you believe would be possible next session to help fund increasing education funding?
Yeah, so as I stated earlier, as of right now, I'm not in favor of any new taxes or fees to raise its revenue. I think that we're going to have to tighten the belt, and we're going to have to look at our budget closely and decide where we're going to need to make cuts and go from there. But again, I'm not looking at any new taxes or new fees from this.
Okay. I wanted to make something clear that did you think that there was any additional revenue streams besides raising taxes?
I think the other option is fees, and I'm not in favor of other fees.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jetton. The next question, we need to continue to fund early childhood intervention, ECI. What steps will you make to ensure all families have access to full day pre-K, Mr. Jetton? Would you like for me to read that again?
I think this is going to be another one of those tough issues. I think under, if we were looking at this last year, the answer may be a little bit different. But going into this next legislative cycle, knowing the challenges that we're going to have, expansion of any programs is going to be very difficult to accomplish, I think.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Morgan, would you like for me to read it again?
Sure, please.
We need to continue to fund early childhood intervention. What steps will you make to ensure all families have access to full day pre-K?
Okay, so, I know there's legislation that was passed this last session that talked about making sure that was done, but there wasn't a funding mechanism. So I want to make sure that burden doesn't get passed down to, our local tax base. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen, but we need to make sure that children get a proper education as well. And so, I'll say the same thing. There's going to be very difficult decisions this next session. I don't know what all we're going to have to do, but we're going to have to find people and ideas that are innovative solutions to solve, these funding problems. So we may have to come up with, again, creative solutions that are outside the box of what we normally think of to try and resolve these things.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And our last question from our audience. What would be your solution for teacher pay, Mr. Jetton?
What would be our solution for teacher pay?
Yes, sir. What would be your solution for teacher pay?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I know. So teacher pay is always something that's talked about in the world of education, right? That teachers don't get paid enough. How can we solve that issue for teacher pay, and how can we make teacher pay competitive in the workforce?
Yeah, so I agree that teachers need to get paid more so that we can track better teachers so that more will choose to go down that profession. I think that, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but when it comes to our next legislative session, expansion and growth when it comes to spending is not going to be the year to try and do those things. And so I am, I am all for figuring that out. I think that maybe a 2023 or 2025 is a thing that we can start addressing. But in the near future, we have some real challenges to work through.
Yes, sir. Mr. Morgan, what would
Sure.
what would be your solution for teacher pay, sir?
So, again, I'll echo the budget thing. It's going to be tough, but I think there's other, again, creative solutions to this. I think additional benefits in some form or fashion, and actually, making sure that teachers, a big problem that I hear from teachers, I have several in my family, and I talk to many because I have 3 kids. So I'm interacting with them on a daily basis. And so I think part of it is making sure that teachers are able to teach and that there's less paperwork that they have to do in the classroom is helpful in keeping teachers and making sure that they're happy. I think also again, increasing, what I'll call fringe benefits, if you will, for teachers, allowing them easier time to schedule time off and, other things like that to allow them to, take a trip or, take a 4-day weekend or something like that. Cause I know it's hard to get, a Friday or a Monday off, especially after a holiday. And so, because it's hard to get subs. So I think figuring out more creative benefits to them would be great. And then, my intent is to work with whoever's elected for, Congressional District 22 and try and eliminate the gap that occurred years ago where teachers aren't able to get Social Security if they work outside of the education system, or they draw very little from it. So, I think if I can work with somebody from our congressional district to get something through for that, that also helps teachers. And we can bring, new teachers into the system that have spent time out in the workforce and have real life experiences that will bring great benefit to our classrooms.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I actually had one more question come in, and we'll start with Mr. Morgan here. Public school districts have a publicly elected trustees that are accountable to the public. Private and charter schools do not. As a fiscal conservative, how do you justify giving private and charter schools taxpayer money without publicly elected trustees to oversee and hold the administration accountable? Mr. Morgan.
Sure. So, that's a great question. It's, again, I think my answer on the voucher system was I haven't seen a voucher program or system that I would vote for at this time, because there is lack of accountability, there's lack of transparency, and there's lack of it's not a apples to apples comparison when you're looking at public education and voucher school systems. And so we need to figure out a way to make sure that those things are aligned and taken care of that way. We want to make sure that the kids get the best education, and that parents have the option to choose what's right and what's best for their children to do that. So
thank you, Mr. Morgan. And Mr. Jetton.
Yeah. So one of the nice things about the free market is the idea that the accountability is from the consumer. And so I think that's what you're looking at there is the consumer, the parent that decides where their children's going to go to be educated. They're the ones that are out there making sure that the school system, the schools that they're sending their children to, that those tax dollars would end up going to meet the educational expectations that they have. And so I think that when it comes to accountability and being fiscally conservative, I think it's important that we are protecting taxpayer dollars, but I think there's a degree of trust that needs to be put on the parents when they're deciding where those dollars will go to, and ensuring that that school meets the educational expectations they have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jetton. Well, that concludes our audience participation questions. Last on our program today is our closing statements. Mr. Jetton started us off, and so we're going to have Mr. Morgan start for this last question. And the question is, this is your closing statement, mind you. Why should I vote for you to be House District 26 representative? You will have 1 minute, sir.
Well, no one will outwork me. You know, I've put the work in. We've knocked 20,000 doors, you know, to get out and reach and talk to the individual voters. And I want to make sure that, you know, I speak to every voter that I possibly can. And so I won't be outworked now through the campaign, and I won't be outworked when I get into office and elected as well. So I will be working 24/7 to make sure that, you know, I'm taking care of and responding to and, you know, addressing the concerns and issues that the constituents of House District 26 have. And so I thank you for your vote and your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Jetton, why should I vote for you to be the House District 26 representative, sir?
Yeah, so as a parent, I recognize the need for us to have a good education system for our kids to grow up in. I think it's the future of Texas, it's the future of the United States. We have to have an educated workforce, and that's what our economy is built on. As a small business owner, I recognize that our kids right now, they're going through this situation, will eventually be out there in the workforce. And the decisions we make now, the decisions we make in this next legislative session could have a huge impact on their competitiveness in the workforce. And so I will fight hard to make sure that they're getting the education that they need to be competitive out there in the workforce, and ensure that we have a Texas that is free and full of opportunities for them as they grow up. And so my background in the legislative session and in the 83rd legislative session, I guess I'm at my end. So that'll wrap that up then.
Thank you, Mr. Jetton.
Then it goes quick.
It does go quick. And I want to sincerely thank both of you gentlemen and Dr. Lalani for joining us today. And I'm glad that we can provide you an opportunity to speak about public education. So just thank you. Thanks for your participation, your engagement in the forum. And at this time, I will ask Dr. Robert Long, who's our Regional Advocacy Director for Raise Your Hand Texas and organizer for today's forum, to come forward to make time to share some information about Raise Your Hand Texas. Dr. Long.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burdine, Mr. Board President. I appreciate it. So thank you all for attending this virtual forum. For those of you who don't know, my name is Robert Long, and I am the Regional Advocacy Director for Outreach in the West Houston area. For those of you who are not familiar with Raise Your Hand Texas, we are a nonprofit fully funded by our founder, Charles Butt, who is the founder and CEO of HEB. And we have grown into grassroots advocacy efforts. I am one of 13 regional advocacy directors hired across the state to bring business, community, parents, civic organizations, and local educators together to cultivate a pro-public education climate in Texas. Through candidate forums, voter turnout events, and other engagement efforts, we are here to inform the public about issues facing our public schools, share the organization's policy efforts, and help shift the narrative around public education in this great state. We are a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse any candidates. Our only candidate is pro-public education. So why do we do this work? Because we know that the future of Texas is in our public schools. We are here to support and uplift public education. The question is, will you join us? So if you enjoyed this event, you can join us and be a part of this movement by scanning the barcode located on your screen now, or texting Raise My Hand to 40649. This will allow you to stay connected to the happenings with Raise Your Hand Texas, any future candidate forums, newsletters, and advocacy alerts for you to take action at the time during the next 87th legislative session. Before I turn this back over to our moderator, Mr. Jason Burdine, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the work and support of those who brought this discussion into reality for you all today. First of all, I would like to thank our partners, Ms. Carrie Smith, who is the CEO of the Fort Bend Chamber, my partner in crime and getting this organized, Ms. Julie Nesmith, Director of Programs for Fort Bend, Dr. Charles Dupree, Superintendent for Fort Bend ISD, Dr. Thomas Randall, Superintendent for Lamar Consolidated ISD, Mr. Jim Rice, Board Trustee and Fort Bend Chamber Education Division Chair. Thank you for your guidance and mentorship. Ms. Joy Williams, who is the School Board President for Lamar Consolidated ISD, Mr. John Welsh, who is a Board Trustee in Lamar Consolidated ISD, Dr. Mike Rockwood, who is a Deputy Superintendent in Lamar Consolidated ISD, the candidates, Dr. Lalani, Mr. Matt Morgan, and Mr. Jacey Jetton, thank you. And before I turn it over, I would like to say a great thanks to our moderator, Mr. Jason Burdine, School Board President, for taking the time and volunteering to help facilitate this important discussion. And that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Folks, please remember these important election dates. Make sure your voice is heard through your vote. Please develop a voter plan and get out the vote. Many decisions regarding the governance and funding of school happens at the state legislative level, which is why these conversations are so vital to inform the voting public. Early voting is tomorrow, Friday, July 10th, 2020 at 7 p.m.
Hello.
Please, Dr. Lalani.
Hey, sorry, somehow I got dropped off. Are we still going on, or what's the status?
No, sir. We are actually concluding our event, and I was sending a reminder to all the voters out there to get out and vote tomorrow.
Well, I'm sorry I got dropped off. I tried a couple times to get back to Zoom, but I think some technology issue is happening.
Thank
My
you.
apologies.
All right. You know what, Dr. Lalani, since you were able to log back on, why don't you give us a minute for a closing statement for our voters who are with us here today. I'm gonna give you, I'd like to give you 1 minute to tell us why it is that you'd be the best House District 26 representative.
Well, first of all, my apologies. I got dropped off. But I'm running because of my passion and empathy. As a physician, we are trained to be a good listener, a critical thinker, and then a good team leader. And my involvement with the community and nonprofits and other organizations, I believe that I know my district well, and I can represent them better. We need legislation. We need somebody who can command respect, but also can work on both the sides of the aisle. So that's what I'm looking for, your support and vote. And I think I will represent, I will bring the science, I will bring the humanity. I believe in the fair and accessible and accountable leadership. And good legislation can affect everybody, irrespective of their color, creed, or gender. And I could be the best representation for the District 26. Thank you. And again, my apologies that I got dropped
out. Well, thank you, Dr. Lalani. I'd also like to ask the other candidates if you would give Dr. Lalani maybe another minute to say anything else if he would like to take the opportunity to do so. That'd be okay with you two gentlemen?
Yes.
Mr. Lalani, would you like to address anything else specifically? I can give you a few topics that we talked about today. Vouchers, school finance, COVID-19.
You know, COVID-19 is affecting all of us, and health and safety is at the mind of everybody. Again, you know, we also know that education is very important. We need to try our best of our abilities to be creative. You know, this is also giving us the opportunity that we need to be more creative. We are probably going towards more virtual, and as the time will pass, and if we get better with the numbers and COVID, maybe we'll start with some hybrid with in-person and with virtual training. So we need to spend our resources. We need to look into more solutions We need to get out of brick and mortar, but maybe more investment in IT, and also not just the infrastructure, but how we will reach the students, because sometimes they live in the area and neighborhood where they don't have good internet or things like that. So we need to be very creative in our thinking and policies out. It's a challenging time for everybody, but we need to look into the funds too, and it is good that we got CARE Act money that given to us, but we need to make sure that we continue to focus and be more creative with funding, maybe look into creative ways, look into the contracts again for their efficacy, for their prudency, avoid duplication, and gives teachers the training for personal training. A lot of teachers are not trained for virtual training, so give them the education and resources in that regard too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lalani, and I wanted to thank once again Mr. Matt Morgan and Jacey Jetton for allowing Dr. Lalani to make a statement here. So,
thank you, Matt, and thank you, Jacey. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us again. And once again, I'll start over with please get out and vote. Please develop a voter plan to help get out the vote. Once again, many decisions regarding the governance and funding of schools happens at the state legislative level, which is why these conversations are so vital and important to the voting public. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., tomorrow, Friday, July 10th at 7 p.m., early voting ends. And also as a reminder, Election Day is Tuesday, July 14th, 2020, and polls do close at 7 p.m. that day as well. I also want you to be aware of a few upcoming events. We have the State of the County, which is September 16th, 2020 at Safari, Texas Ranch. And I'd also like for you to visit our FortBendChamberVotes.com. It's a valuable resource that provides relevant information and serves as a vehicle for grassroots participation and connection to the elected officials here in Fort Bend County. On behalf of Raise Your Hand Texas and the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce, we thank you for joining us for the Candidate Forum Runoff Edition. And please be sure to vote and vote early. My name is Jason Burdine. On behalf of the Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustees and myself, it's an honor to be here and have this great conversation for the benefit of 5.4 million kids in this great state. Anytime we have meaningful conversations about public education, students win. Thank you, and I hope you have a great afternoon.